content.
Nice.
I said go check it out. See if it's interesting. It's 75 battery, so it's like Nuremberg.
Okay.
Cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So you are.
You just have to give a speech. From the chair.
You want to trade?
Am I the only one in the front row?
I could be in the front row, but then I'd be blocking her. Unless it's just places. It's okay.
Alright, so first of all, I'm going to say thank you to Jason. He bought me this wonderful dry erase easel just so I could draw a big vagina on it.
This will make sense with some context.
So, I'm going to be talking about IVF. I've just recently been going through it since January, and I'll kind of take you on my journey. But I kind of want to understand.
What is IVF?
So IVF is in vitro fertilization, and actually, I guess the title's talk really is birth controlled. So I'd actually love to kind of understand a little bit more about everyone. If you or a partner you've been with has taken the pill, raise your hand.
I think so.
Okay. If any of you have tried to conceive. Okay. If any of you have frozen eggs. All right. Yeah. So this is kind of about that whole IUI. Any IUI folks here?
What is IUI?
In uterine insemination.
Intrauterine.
Intrauterine, thank you. So yeah, I'll kind of take you through each of those as we go, but just kind of wanted to get a sense of the room. And a little bit about me first. I met Jason through a coffee meetup I used to run, and we would go from, it was called, actually a meal as well. We would go to a coffee shop, and then we'd go to a park, and our name was Coffee Park Nomads, and brought a little community together, and then Jason and I did Landmark together, which I think brought us even closer together.
Are you still running on that?
No, unfortunately, sorry.
It was great while it lasted.
Maybe I'll replicate it for my SCLP, which is the next Landmark course I'm taking. But a little bit of history about me. I'm 36. In fertility time, that's ancient. No, just kidding. But it's kind of, getting up there. From years 15 to 35, so that's like 20 years, I've been on birth control. And somewhere in the middle, around 26, I got married. I thought he was great, but, and then at 27, we got pregnant, and I decided absolutely he's not great anymore. And we are still actually friendly. We still, say hello and wish each other happy anniversary, happy birthdays, but it's kind of limited at that. And so I've kind of had one abortion. If anyone wants to talk to me about that later, that's fine. But at 32, I kind of found my dream partner on a boat in Indonesia, and he was my dive instructor. And we kind of fell for each other. He's French, and so we took a year to immigrate and figure out logistics. Finally imported him and turned him into a web developer. And then so at 34, I was married. He took a while to get a career, a job, and we postponed our, a year after marriage to kind of just get settled into things. We'd never lived together before. And then it was kind of like a year anniversary, we went our year-delayed honeymoon. So we went to Raja Ampat, we went diving, we came back, we started trying to conceive, which is abbreviated TTC, for those of you who are up in the forums. So if you've never tried to conceive, you probably think sex is a lot of fun. Right, and I kind of want to just preview it for the men, for the women, what kind of goes into the not fun part of trying to conceive. And I'll tell you that, just kind of a brief outline here of the month, right? So a month has about 4 weeks in it, and let's say day 1 to day 5 is a woman's period, 6 and 7. And then the second week right here is like fertility week. So you're trying. And then this third week, you're waiting. And then this fourth week, you're testing. Right? And so that means, and keep in mind, this is sort of like, ends up being like your week off. But just in this fertile window, what happens is, by the way, this is a hot tip, you go onto Amazon and you can buy like 100 of these, right? And I think in like drugstores like Walgreens, they'll sell these to you at like one of them for 20 bucks. But you go on Amazon and you can buy like 100 of these for 20 bucks. And every morning you pee on this little strip and it'll tell you like, if it's a light line, then it's like starting ovulation. If it's like a darker line, you're kind of like really fertile. And so every morning before he gets up to go to work, it's like I'll run to the bathroom, pee on the strip, come back and be like, it's on. You know. And same, it's like sometimes like, oh, I'll be so sleepy, I didn't get up in time, and he went to work, and I'll be like, shit. It's like the right timing, right? And so after work, he comes home, and it's like, there's always the debate of like, do I make it natural for him, just like pretend it's really sexy, or do I just be like, come on, get home, so like get in bed. So it's really hard in this time to not feel like, I feel like sometimes he maybe felt, he was basically serving a purpose. I don't know how many of you are watching Handmaid's Tale, but we were watching that. And yeah, so you're kind of doing that, and then the waiting part is not any more fun. So as a woman, I did all kinds of things of laying in bed at night and in the morning thinking about like, can I feel it? And it is kind of anxiety inducing, just like, was that it? Right? Or, after sex, like sitting with your legs up on the wall, or doing all kinds of violent things, like not going to the bathroom for 3 hours. You just kind of try all these different things and you read about it. Like I was constantly like, how can you tell? And so that's the waiting. And then the testing, again, like Walgreens sells the pregnancy tests. They're like fancy little things with digital readouts, but all you need is one of these and you can get a 100-pack cheap. Yeah, let's see, that's kind of to do with the cycle timing, the reality of it. We started in February of last year trying, and by May, we actually had some good news. And by that time, we hadn't really been trying that hard, it was still kind of fun. But by July, I went to my cousin's baby shower in New York City, and I surprised a friend and showed up, and he was like, oh my God, you showed up, he was so surprised, and he asked me to like help him move a bureau. And so I helped him move an enormous bureau up a flight of stairs because I didn't want to share that I was pregnant. And so who knows, right? I think that I came back home, and immediately after I got off the flight, I started bleeding. And there's always sort of this in the back of my mind of just like, was it the flight, right? Was it helping someone move a gigantic bureau up a floor of stairs? Was it, all these different kinds of things. I feel guilty, like I shouldn't have traveled. And then there's just sort of the physical unpleasantness of it. It just feels like you're having your period for a while, and you feel suddenly unpregnant, like your breasts are no longer swollen, like, I don't know, these hormones that have been going through you feel like they're just stopped. And then I was just mid-conversation with a coworker, and I just felt this little like thing drop out of my vagina. So, not the most pleasant feeling, and certainly there was just sort of like the caring of partnership, making sure like, it was amazing for me in that time, and making sure that I was taking care of myself, and getting the support to know that it's not me or it's not my fault. And what I've learned after a lot of reinforcement is that most of the time it's genetic abnormality, and it's still really hard not to be like, it's a flight or it was that bureau, but I keep reminding myself genetic abnormality is really often are the reason. So let's kind of go forward. I decided roughly around landmark time that I was going to sort of just like get on with it, right? Like it had been about a year we've been trying, right? And I don't know, we took months off of just being less concerned about it. But in January, I was like, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna engage and enroll others in helping me make this happen, helping us make this happen. So first thing, if you ever wanna get help with this, is go check out your fertility. So for Noe, that meant like getting a sperm count and a check. For sperm, it's like all about motility and count and concentration, the shape of the sperm, all these different kinds of factors. And then for women, actually the first thing we did was we went to this info session at UCSF. So I went through UCSF, and I only considered UCSF because one, I knew they pretty much had the top in terms of healthcare outcomes, and two, they were the most convenient in terms of workplace. So I knew that I could like make a ton of appointments happen while I was going to work. And so if you go to orientation, which is free, you just go to like the 5th floor on a Tuesday night, tons of couples there, and you get like this huge walkthrough. There's this really nice handout that they give you. And what I loved about this handout was, first of all, they outline the cost to you. And if anyone hasn't researched this, it's about $16,000, and most places don't, or most people don't have insurance that will cover this. So we pretty much paid out of pocket, and I know that I'm pretty lucky in having to only go through it once so far. Some people have to go through it several times. But in orientation, they go through a little bit of the cost, and then they show you a lot of pictures. So if you're curious about the process, they kind of take you through it. They tell you about outcomes. They show you, like, this is not a penis. This is actually a needle tip, and that is a blastocyst on the end of it. So there's some really cool up-close science pictures. They show you a picture of the labs and some of the cool innovations. Yes?
What is a blastocyst?
Oh, good question. Blastocyst is a fertilized embryo or fertilized egg that is grown out to a couple days. Yeah, sometimes I rarely talk about this to people at this level, so thanks for bringing up terminology I'm using that may not work. These are like the frozen tanks they have in the facility, where if you choose to like freeze your eggs, they will keep them there. They're like earthquake safe, and you have to pay like a membership fee every year to like make sure they freeze them. So after orientation, we actually had our consultation, and the consultation is $500. I think that's pretty standard around most places you go. But what they do at the consultation, the first thing is the doctor will tell you your options, and so that's where your options kind of come to life. There, let's see. So this kind of IUI. So that's intrauterine insemination, and then there's IVF. And then there's, from IVF, there's something called like a fresh transfer. And frozen transfer. And so IUI is actually is much less intrusive, right? So IUI, basically you start taking some medication in the early days, and then that second week where you're pretty primed for being fertile, they kind of you do some shots, right? So pills, shots, and I can tell you a little bit more about the pills and the shots later, but and then this is the point where they basically, the male comes into a cup, they take the sample, and they use a catheter and just like puts it in the uterus. And then they cross their fingers and hope for the best. right? So it's not like they're not taking anything out, right? And so with IVF, you kind of go through the same thing, like pills, shots, and then, right here, they do an egg retrieval. And after the egg retrieval, they can either do a fresh transfer, which means like day 1 or 2, they might just like put one back in after it's fertilized, right? They might do a day 5, so they could do a day 5, transfer. And then they could do a frozen transfer. So the benefit of day 5 transfer is that they, I think in that time, can get genetic testing done on it. So if you want to do if you're not sure, you want to, by the way, the second part really after the consultation is that we go get genetic testing and a bunch of blood work done. So you'll know if you are a carrier as well as your partner, and you can figure out like if it makes sense to get genetic testing. But you can also delay it. So a lot of people, when they say like they're getting their eggs frozen, they basically go up to this point and then they freeze their eggs, right? And it's only people who are trying to conceive, right, who actually either do the fresh transfer or day 5 transfer. That make sense? Yeah. Okay, well, let me see, where am I? In the consultation, they also give us some interesting statistics. So if you're like age 20 to, if you're age 20 to 25, you have probably like 25 or more eggs every month, or sorry, follicles every month. And if you're 25, maybe I should go back, sorry. It's so unrehearsed. So, yeah, maybe I'll have to do the picture of the vagina sooner. Okay, so here's the ovaries, and then out of here, that's a vagina. Sorry, this is the vag, okay? And then this is the uterus. And so what happens every month is here is where your eggs live, or sorry, this is where your follicles live, right? And your follicles, every month you release a bunch of follicles, right? And that's kind of happening while you have your period. And then when you, and please if you...
So you release the eggs from the follicles that are developing.
Right, so you start out with follicles, right?
The follicles remain in the ovaries?
But I thought they were counting my follicles.
Right, but what actually gets released that goes down the fallopian tube into the uterus is your egg.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
The follicles where it like grows and develops before being released.
Okay, so then they're all staying down here. That makes more sense. Okay. So you have a bunch of follicles every month, and then at some point, one of them matures in a month, and then is released. And then that one kind of makes the trip down here, and waits for a sperm to meet it along this path. And if it doesn't, then it comes out, right? And they take turns. So sometimes it'll be this month, sometimes it'll be that month, right? And in IVF here, these pills, what they're basically trying to do is increase the number of follicles that you're generating here. So there's more potential sites for eggs to materialize. So instead of just one, which is what your body does to regulate, it says like mature one of them and release it down this tube. During the IVF, through these pills and these shots, what you're trying to do is like release as many of these grow as many of these follicles, continue growing them, and then the actual creating of the egg as well. Your body would typically say like just make one egg, but the shots basically say make them all eggs. Right? So then they all, and you're taking also different hormones to suppress the ovulation step. So as you get closer to the follicles developing and growing, and the eggs developing and maturing, then there will be a point where they ask you to take a trigger shot. And the trigger shot is what lets them all mature and ovulate. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm glad we have a doctor in the room. So I guess what I was originally saying is that when you're younger, right, so 20 to 25, you have about 25 follicles that come out naturally every month. And by the time you're like 35, like me, that number is much closer to like 10 to 15. And so that's what was really interesting in going to the consultation, was getting that counted out. Because they basically just like stick a little wand in you, and I printed some pictures. Right, so you can see this little, like, this is the machine, and this is the little white wand that goes in, and those are the rubbers they use. So they have like little wand condoms. So you can see what they stick inside, and then that's how they're able to figure out, like, you know, do you have 10 to 15, and that's really the first diagnostic that happens. Got it. And so the reason why we went with IVF instead of IUI was basically because the only thing that matters in terms of getting a kid growing healthily is the age of the egg. So if you're 60 years old and you have a 30-year-old egg in you, it's going to be like healthy. And so think about that, because we were thinking like, hey, we might want like 4 or 5 years in between of getting a sibling. Right, and so it won't matter that I'm like 5 years older, it'll only matter like what age of the egg is. And that's why we didn't choose IUI. Okay, I'm gonna quickly go through the funnel of what's expected, of what was expected. Let's see here. So we expected at my age to have 14 eggs retrieved. And then we expected 12 of those to actually be mature. And then 9 of them to be embryos, or 9 of them to be fertilized into embryos. Day 3, start erasing some of this. And then we probably only end up with 3 to 4, day 5, 6 embryos. And then here we decide whether we want to transfer 1 or 2. That's a 40%, 60% rate. And then after that, we would potentially have 1 to do PGS, which is the genetic testing. So that one we would put away to like store it for a sibling later. Right. So you can see by this funnel, it's not very optimistic for your $16,000. Right? We would probably have like 3 to 4 potential ones. And of these 3 to 4, you can miscarry, they can be genetically abnormal, like it could not work, right? And so your best guarantee is if you actually don't do this, you do all the PGS testing, but that delays it. And so, let me see. Yeah, just briefly the rest of the process. You do a lot of like blood work and genetic testing. We went to an injection class, so if you've never injected yourself or you don't know what that's about, it was really helpful for my partner to be part of it, right? So I think going to the UCSF clinic with me before work, if he could, that was always welcome. And then the injections was like one other way he could help me, even though eventually like I figured out how to do it and it wasn't that imperative that he do it for me, but just to like help him feel involved in the process. But you kind of end up mixing things, and I kind of brought some of this, some of the meds. So you can see this is like a gonal pen, and they have this like fancy way you can just, I mean, the medicine is really, really expensive. So like you get like 8 of these, it's like $4,000, right? And if you go through UCSF, they actually have like a great package where we got it at a supreme discount, like $50. But people trade like little amounts of like this on the black market for a lot. And you can just add the needle here and then inject. And injecting is just like pinching some of your fat and sticking it right in. And you'll be doing like 1 or 2 of those every week or 2. Sometimes you have to like mix these like little vials yourself of the medicine and draw them out and stick them in. And yes, it seems terrifying, but ultimately like you get comfortable with it and it doesn't seem like that bad. All right, so what other fun is there? The rest of the process, I'm going to grab my other pictures. These are some other pictures from the clinic. So this is just the heart rate machine, right? You go in and every time you get your blood pressure taken, you get weighted, you get your heart rate taken. And then here's where things get interesting. So every day for the week before transfer, you're going in and you're getting an ultrasound and your blood drawn, and they're measuring estrogen as well as the size of your follicles. And they want your follicles to be of a certain diameter, and that's what you're seeing on these numbers all along here. They're like measuring. And then you kind of see the progression here. So in these charts, you'll kind of see this line, horizontal line across the top is what they want you to be crossing to get enough mature ones, right? And so the black ones are your left ovary, the red ones are your right ovary, and so some of them may be more mature than the others. But essentially, you're kind of waiting for all the meds to work out, and then you'll kind of go in and get all of them retrieved. And what was amazing was we expected about this, right? 14 eggs retrieved, 12 mature, 9 embryos. I'll tell you here, I'll pass these around, and then I'll tell you what we ended up with. We ended up with, let's see. We ended up with 31 eggs retrieved, which was a huge, hugely like double, right? And then we ended up with only 21 mature. We had 18 fertilized embryos. And we had, this is where it got wonky, because I actually had over OHSS. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's over hyperstimulation syndrome. Yeah, I think that's it. And it basically means that like your estrogen is through the roof. And so what they could have had more eggs mature, but I would have basically like been so full of eggs that it would have kind of bled into, or like there would have been liquid filling my lungs. So I was just on the border of that. And that's really what is dangerous in this whole process. So as a result, 6 of those, of these 18, 4 stopped growing, 6 were not high enough grade, and then the last 8 were considered grade BB, right? So these were grade C, and these were no good. And so the 8 BB ones, that's the egg quality and the placenta quality. Of those, we got those all genetically tested. 3 were abnormal. So I'll just say they were not. And then 5 were viable. So we ended up with 5, and then we ended up with like 3 boys and 2 girls. So because I had OHSS, we didn't do a fresh transfer, which means I would have been like implanted the next Saturday of my retrieval. But because I had OHSS, the recovery was like 2 weeks. I was like a bloated cow walking around. Because you just, I don't know what happens, but you just, feel so full, like a seal. Have you seen seals? But that's why I kind of have frozen them all, and now I'm actually going through like this transfer end of June this month. I'll be doing the transfer like we're gonna blindly do one of them. So wish me luck, and I really hope, this has helped you in some way to either be supportive for a partner or find a partner and not worry too much about their age, or I don't know, go on this journey with someone. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
When you say you're blindly going to do one of them, you're only picking one of the 5, or are you actually putting in a few more just in case, some doesn't stick?
Yeah, great question. So I think the chances with one are 40% of birth. If you put 2 in, it's 60% chance of a live birth. And so it's our call whether to do 1 or 2. I think we're going to try to do 1 first because Noe really doesn't want the idea of twins to happen. And that creates a lot of like complications potentially if there are twins. So yeah, most fertility clinics want to optimize for like 1 live birth.
And how many kids total you're looking at?
We would like to have 2. And that's another weird thing. It's like we've created 5, which is great, but there's nothing really to be able to do with them if we don't use them. Right, and so you can continue paying the $2,000 annual membership to be frozen in the tank, but ultimately you either give them to science, or I would love to give them to a friend who's trying. I've had one friend who's tried 4 or 5 times in the last year and hasn't had any normal embryos. But it's also weird to be like, hey, raise our kid.
Our genetics are superior.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you put the eggs in the frozen tank, is the expiration days too?
Apparently they've proven like 10 years is still pretty good. They don't have enough data to like know past that. But yeah, it's weird to think about ideas like, could I pass them on to my kids?
So what happens after you've chosen one of them? Like what's the next steps?
Yeah, so this month I've been on birth control, and then they've also been sort of like giving me an injection to prevent me from ovulating. So they're going to control it very carefully of exactly when I ovulate. You can choose a medicated route or you can choose a natural route. If you're choosing a natural route, they're basically monitoring you a lot more. If you're medicated, you come in once and then you take a Vicodin and they put a catheter and they put it in. Yeah.
So I wanted to add one thing about, just like on the societal level, is many people when couples are having issues with conceiving, they tend to blame the woman. And I'm glad that recently, in the last couple of years, there's been increased awareness that oftentimes the guy can also be the issue. So it's important, like you briefly touched on it, but I just want to emphasize that men should also get tested if there is any issue with fertility.
Yeah, and that's a great point actually, because there's something called ICSI, and I don't remember what it stands for at all, but it's basically happening in the fertilization phase. So based on the result of the sperm tests, if like my husband's sperm tests were great except for shape, and so shape can sometimes affect, like you'll get a score like 2% or 4%, and 4% is like ideal shape, and 2% is not so ideal. So what they do with ICSI is they actually crack open the egg and like put the contents of the sperm inside the egg, so that you really leave no room for error, right? Where you could have just put the sperm and the egg in the same petri dish and like let magic happen. They really just like hand do it.
Because the sperm actually has to do a lot of work. There's like these enzymes in the tip, and essentially it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Not morphs. It penetrates the egg capsule and then releases its genetic material. So if like the enzymes are not functioning as they should, then this comes into play.
Exciting stuff. Yeah.
Would you recommend to younger women to freeze their eggs?
Interesting.
Like looking back, would you have given
Actually,
yourself that
better-
recommendation?
Can you define the age?
Well, like I'm 26, right? I do not plan on having kids freeze until I'm like 33, 35. But if I freeze my eggs now, will I be safe? Would you think like it's a good idea because you know what, you're going through this experience and you as like 26 probably would have rather frozen your eggs back then? Or do you think like when you're 33, 35, like that's just an appropriate time to like actually start thinking about this?
Yeah, so what I would say is that like when I was 27, I got pregnant super easily, right? And I didn't think about it. I'm pretty sure I was drunk at Disney World. And like I'm pretty sure that like between 30 and 35 is probably a better window because you still don't sort of have trouble or as abnormal eggs. And it's a little bit clearer who your partner might be. Like one thing I've heard is that eggs freeze better if they're fertilized, and they don't freeze quite as well if they're not. And so I have a couple friends who are over 40 who have frozen eggs fertilized with a donor donor sperm. They like fertilized half of them with donor sperm and then kept half of them as unfertilized. And I guess my thinking is really just that between 30 and 35 is really when you have a clear picture of like, are you going to have a partner sooner than later? Like I wish I had frozen around 30, 32, right? 25, 27, I feel like it might have been like more of a waste of money, right? Because it's like, well, maybe I'll meet him, soon. In which case you could save a lot of money and go to Disney World a lot.
May I offer my 2 cents on that? So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of there's some debate on the issue because there's one camp of people that say the whole idea of freezing your eggs, especially when you're younger, is just a money scam, and these companies are just charging exorbitant amounts and they obviously want to persuade you to freeze your eggs at a younger age. And the research that we have in medicine that says, women's fertility like sharply declines right at 35. And like you're born with like millions of eggs, or follicles I should say, and then by the time you're 35, like the number just steeply drops. And that's why it's so much harder to get pregnant. Now, people are saying that the actual research we have saying that your fertility drops, and the whole idea that you're more likely to have, trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome, or other genetic abnormalities in your children, has been overplayed and isn't nearly as big of a deal as it really is. So those are like the two camps of thought, and obviously you want to do like research and speak to your own physician for any advice on that, but just something to keep in mind.
And it sounds like there's an annual cost to keep it frozen on top of that
Yeah.
cost too.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense too, like, for example, the woman at work who just went through it with me, or around the same time, she actually ended up with 36 eggs retrieved, and ended up with like 26 mature, and then she ended up with, of course, no embryos. So she has 26 mature eggs stuck in her freezer right now. So her result is pretty good. She's 34. And I have a couple friends, like I said, over 40 who had something like 10 eggs retrieved, right? So the number of eggs and the number of I think normal eggs does go down, I think, after the 40 mark, but it's, you can always find anomalies, and certainly health and lifestyle are a factor, but yeah, who knows? It's wild. It's wild to expect 14 and get 31, and I've had other people have the opposite, so. Thank you.